Ever since Ukraine won independence from the collapsed Soviet Union in 1991, corruption has been a plague that reached an intolerable climax with the Maidan Revolution in 2014. By then, Ukraine President Victor Yanukovych, an ally of Vladimir Putin, and the 56 members of his criminal gang of corrupt officials known as the Family, had robbed his country of over $40 billion, laundered through 400 shell companies and banks such as Wilbur Ross's Bank of Cyprus. The Putin-supported economic rape of Ukraine destroyed 2/3 of its economy and left utilities, roads, hospitals, and schools in ruins, while the insatiable Yanukovych spent $2.5 billion on a sprawling 350-acre estate with a massive 6-story, obscenely lavish palace that he filled to overflowing with rare automobiles, animals, art, and treasures. Helping Yanukovych loot his country were luminaries like Paul Manafort, who had jackets made out of ostriches from the palace zoo. Like Minister of Ecology Mykola Zlochevsky, who had control over all natural resources and grossly abused his power by seizing the largest private gas company, Burisma, and selling off state assets to maintain his own opulent palatial estate. And prosecutor gangster Victor Shokin, who opened every investigation by demanding the target pay a bribe to avoid prosecution.
I mean, if you had the media uncovering criminal actions in the West, that leads to criminal investigation and possibly criminal convictions. In Ukraine, the two are separated. You have fantastic investigations by civil society, by journalists, and then nothing happens. Nobody goes to jail in Ukraine.
The furious Ukrainian people finally rose up and overthrew the corrupt Yanukovych regime in the bloody Maidan Revolution of 2014, giving them hope of escape from the culture of corruption, paid for with the blood of 104 protesters killed by snipers.
But in addition, you also have a battle, a historic battle against corruption. And it's not enough to set up a new anti-corruption bureau and establish a special prosecutor fighting corruption. The Office of the General Prosecutor desperately needs reform.
But corruption remained. Pirate Zlochevsky openly claimed ownership of the stolen gas giant Burisma, and before reforms could be enacted, another secret Putin puppet fooled Ukrainians into electing him president, Petro Poroshenko. Instead of reforming their broken Justice Department, known as the Prosecutor General's Office, Poroshenko guaranteed its corruption by elevating none other than the notorious Victor Shokin to the top position. Countries around the world tried to recover stolen monies stashed in their banks, led by the UK. Britain's Serious Fraud Office froze $23 million from Zlochevsky's illegal sale of an oil storage facility and launched an investigation that required Ukraine to send documentation. Instead of the needed records, however, gangster General Shokin took a $7 million bribe from Zlochevsky and wrote letters to the London courts completely exonerating the Burisma chief of any wrongdoing. The Serious Fraud Office was forced to drop the case. At the same time, Zlochevsky tried to buy political protection by appointing the ex-president of Poland and attorney Hunter Biden to the board of Burisma. But it didn't help.
This is a delicate thing to say to a group of leaders in their House of Parliament, but you have to fight the cancer of corruption that is endemic in your system right now.
Demands increased for the investigations of Zlochevsky's past crimes when he was ecology minister, but Victor Shokin made sure nothing would come of it by faithfully sticking to his corrupt practice of turning every investigation into a shakedown. In all his years as prosecutor, he never prosecuted a single person of status or wealth.
One of the problems is that the prosecutor's office is still a Soviet institution controlled by a president, and it protects elites from criminal convictions. It doesn't have anything to do with the rule of law.
Jewelry store owner Serhiy Kiselyov lost millions in cash, gold, and diamonds confiscated in an illegal police raid. Notoriously, two of Shokin's crony prosecutors were busted later with hordes of cash extorted from investigation targets, as well as Kiselyov's diamonds. Honest prosecutors in Shokin's office were fired, had their lives threatened, and their offices sprayed with machine gun fire. Shokin had steadfastly refused to prosecute Burisma, causing the UK to be joined by the EU, the IMF, and the US to call for Shokin's removal. The IMF and EU were threatening to stop $40 billion in aid to Ukraine, utterly dwarfing all US contributions, if Shokin remained. Genuine anti-corruption activist Daria Kalinyuk said it was the big demand within society in Ukraine to get rid of this guy.
We are here now to ask our president what the hell going on. This is not what we were asking for during Maidan. This is not what we were expecting after Yanukovych ran away. It is up to the president to initiate resignation of Shokin. It's up to the president to ensure that Parliament has enough votes to accept this resignation.
This was the perilous atmosphere Joe Biden walked into to confront Ukraine's deep corruption.
I'm desperately concerned about the backsliding on the part of Kyiv in terms of corruption. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, what, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
Joe Biden demanded Shokin be fired because he would not prosecute Burisma CEO Zlochevsky. Repeat, because Shokin would not prosecute Burisma. Joe Biden demanded a real investigation of Burisma, even though that may have jeopardized his son's position. Joe Biden demanded a legal quid pro quo by threatening to withhold loans if Shokin wasn't fired. Legal because it benefited his country, not Biden personally. Joe Biden bragged about his achievement in a public forum because he was proud of doing the right thing, fighting corruption instead of causing it.
Joe Biden went there and said, you've got to get rid of this prosecutor and you've got to crack down on corruption. The significance of his trip was that it was backed up by the whole Western world. There were several large Western countries that were demanding that the Ukraine fire this prosecutor and crack down on corruption. His actions to demand the firing of this prosecutor and to ask for a greater crackdown had the possible effect of making his son have even greater legal peril than he did by being on the board of Burisma, because it could have led to a more aggressive investigation of Burisma.
President Poroshenko caved and asked for Shokin's resignation, yet Shokin refused to leave. Outraged, the Ukrainian parliament had to call an emergency session to force Shokin's removal.
Following months of criticism for not being able or not willing to fight the corruption in the country, as well as in his very own agency, the Parliament of Ukraine has just approved the dismissal of General Prosecutor of Ukraine, Mr. Victor Shokin, with 289 votes. One of the most vocal critics of now former General Prosecutor's policy and his reluctance to fight with corruption is happy with the vote.
He didn't investigate a single case related to the terror and killings on Maidan. Not a single case on corruption before or after Maidan. Actually, that's exactly why he was appointed, for covering up top corruption and for hiding cases on Maidan killings.
Shokin was a symbol of hiding corruption and supporting corruption, especially high-rank corruption in Ukraine.
Now that the general prosecutor has been dismissed, the question is who will step into his shoes. But Sobolev has already a candidate in mind.
I know such persons. For example, David Sakvarilidze. I think he's a good candidate for such position.
Sakvarilidze was indeed considered one of the few in the general prosecutor's office who was really fighting with the corrupt officials. Was fighting until the general prosecutor fired him just 2 hours before his own resignation approved by the parliament.
President Poroshenko dismissed David Sakvarilidze, the guy who was trying to fight against the system and actually to implement the reform.
So let me get it right. 2 hours before the Parliament of Ukraine approved the dismissal of General Prosecutor fires his deputy, who happens to be one of the few reformists in the General Prosecution Office, and Mr. Sakvarilidze was fighting indeed with corruption. At the same time, a few days before that, the General Prosecution Office opens a criminal investigation investigating your center's financial matters.
Sadly, Shokin's replacement, chosen by Poroshenko, was Yuri Lutsenko, who took money from Rudy Giuliani's thugs to cook up lies. Swearing revenge for his removal, the evil Shokin created affidavits falsely claiming he was stopped from investigating Burisma and recruited eager Trump gangster Giuliani to peddle his lies.
This is under oath. It's signed under penalties of perjury by Victor Shokin.
While Shokin was evening his score with Biden, jewelry store owner Kiselyov, who testified against Shokin's diamond prosecutors, was shot dead in his car. Giuliani is working for murderers and gangsters. Just as the struggling Ukrainian people are freeing themselves from the saturated culture of corruption by electing true reformer Zelensky, the Trump gang turns the truth upside down and forces their new president back into a corrupt criminal conspiracy.